The worst table at the cafe wasn't broken. It was the one where Evan Cole realized he'd wasted 3 years hoping to feel whole again. Across from him sat a woman who checked her phone more than his face, who laughed at his carpentry work like it was a hobby instead of how he kept his daughter fed. The deck beneath them creaked, a sound only he noticed, a warning only he understood. Then a stranger at the next table looked up and said 5 words that would rebuild everything. If you're free, sit here. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The late afternoon sun cut through the oak trees surrounding the Riverside Cafe's patio with the kind of golden light that photographers spent fortunes trying to replicate. It painted everything in warm amber, the mismatched chairs, the clay pots overflowing with lavender, the wrought iron fence separating the dining area from the walking trail below. It was the kind of light that promised good things, romantic things. The kind of scene that belonged in a movie about second chances and new beginnings. Evan Cole knew better than to trust pretty lighting. He sat at a corner table, his broad shoulders slightly hunched in a posture he'd perfected over 3 years of single fatherhood, present but not invasive, attentive but ready to disappear if needed. His hands, calloused and scarred from 15 years of framing houses and fixing what other people broke, rested on the weathered wood table. He'd scrubbed them twice before leaving home, but there was still a faint line of sawdust under his thumbnail. Old habits. Across from him, Monica, or was it Monique? He'd have to check the dating app later, laughed at something on her phone screen. It was the 4th time in 20 minutes. She hadn't shown him what was funny, hadn't asked if he wanted to see, just laughed, typed something with French manicured nails that clicked against the glass screen, then glanced up with an apologetic smile that wasn't really apologetic at all. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry. "My girlfriend is having a crisis with her Airbnb guests. They're apparently using her hot tub as a regular tub, like with dish soap." She shook her head, eyes already drifting back to the phone. "People are insane." Evan nodded, took a sip of his coffee, black, no sugar, the way he'd learned to drink it on job sites where cream was a luxury and breaks were short. The coffee was good. He'd give the cafe that. Rich without being bitter, probably locally roasted. The kind of detail that mattered to people who cared about things beyond function. "That sounds frustrating," he offered, which was what he'd learned to say when he didn't know what else to say. His ex-wife used to tell him he was terrible at small talk, that he approached conversation like carpentry, measure twice, cut once, say only what's necessary. She'd meant it as criticism. He'd never quite figured out how to fix it. Monica or Monique made a sound that might have been agreement, but her attention was fractured, split between him and the glowing rectangle in her hand, and the 2 women at a nearby table who kept erupting into laughter over something he couldn't hear. Her eyes flicked between all 3 points like she was watching a tennis match where he was losing. This was a mistake. Evan had known it the moment she'd arrived 15 minutes late, apologized to her phone instead of to him, and ordered a drink with a name he couldn't pronounce that cost more than his daughter's school lunch for a week. But his brother had insisted, had literally created the dating profile for him while Evan was in the shower after a 12-hour shift, had sent the first message pretending to be him. "You can't raise Mira alone forever," Danny had said, sprawled on Evan's couch like he paid rent there. "She needs to see you happy. She needs to see what a healthy relationship looks like." Evan had wanted to argue that Mira saw him happy every time he picked her up from school, every Saturday morning when they made pancakes shaped like her latest obsession, currently dinosaurs, specifically velociraptors, because she'd just learned they were actually smart, Dad, not like in the movies. But Danny had that look, the younger brother determination that came from loving someone enough to meddle. So Evan had let him send the messages and set up the date and promised that it would be low pressure, just coffee. What's the worst that could happen? This was the worst that could happen. Monica's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, smiled, typed something back. Evan watched a couple at a table near the railing feed pieces of croissant to each other, laughing softly between bites. They looked young, maybe mid-20s, still in that phase where sharing food felt romantic instead of practical. He tried to remember if he and Claire had ever been like that, but the memories were old and faded like photographs left too long in sunlight. "So," Monica said suddenly, setting her phone down with visible effort, "you said you do carpentry." Structural carpentry, Evan corrected gently. Framing, mostly. Some restoration work. I've been doing it about 15 years. Oh, that's nice. Her smile was polite, the kind reserved for children explaining their favorite rocks. Like, you build birdhouses and stuff? Something tight formed in Evan's chest, just below his sternum. Not anger, he'd learned to set that down years ago, but a weary recognition. He'd heard variations of this before, from Claire's friends who'd asked when he'd get a real job, from his own father, who still introduced him as between opportunities, from every dinner party where conversation turned to careers, and his was met with sympathetic nods before someone changed the subject. Not quite, he said, keeping his voice level. I work on structural systems, foundations, load-bearing walls, roof framing, the parts of buildings that keep them standing. Right. Monica nodded, but her eyes had already glazed over. That's really physical. Do you work out a lot? You look like you work out. The coffee was cooling in his hand. Evan set it down carefully, aligned it with the faint ring it had already left on the table. Somewhere behind them, a child shrieked with laughter. The good kind. The kind Mira made when he pushed her on the swings at Fletcher Park, higher and higher, until she felt like she was flying. Not really, he answered. The work keeps me in shape. That's so great. I could never do manual labor. I'm such a weakling. She laughed, flexing her thin arm in mock display. I do yoga, though. Hot yoga? It's literally changed my life. Have you ever tried it? Can't say I have. Oh my God, you should. It's so good for flexibility and mental clarity. My instructor says that most people carry tension in their hips because of unprocessed trauma, and honestly, I felt that. She leaned forward slightly, warming to the topic in a way she hadn't warmed to anything about him. There's this studio downtown that does sound bath sessions with the yoga, like with singing bowls. It's transcendent. You'd probably benefit from it. You seem really tense. Evan wasn't tense. He was simply sitting, existing in his body the way he always did, economically, taking up only the space he needed. But he recognized this, too. The diagnosis, the suggestion, the subtle implication that he needed fixing. Claire used to do the same thing, had spent their entire marriage trying to make him more open, more expressive, more something he couldn't quite name or become. I'll keep that in mind, he said, which was what he said when he meant no thank you, but didn't want to be rude about it. Monica's phone buzzed. She grabbed it like it might escape, read something, laughed that high, bright laugh again. Oh my God, now they're asking her where the beach towels are. She literally left them a whole binder of information. She looked up, remembered Evan was there. Sorry, this is just too good. Do you mind? She didn't wait for an answer. Her thumbs flew across the screen, her face animated in a way it hadn't been once during their conversation. Behind her, the sun was starting its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in gradients of orange and pink. Beautiful. Wasted. Evan let his gaze drift across the patio, cataloging details the way he always did on new job sites. The deck was cedar, probably 15 years old based on the weathering pattern, with visible gaps between some of the boards where the wood had contracted. The support posts were 6x6s, appropriately sized for the span, but there was a slight sag in the northwest corner that suggested either settling or rot in the beams below. The railing was decorative wrought iron, powder-coated black, professionally installed but showing rust at the welds where moisture had compromised the coating. Not dangerous. Not yet. But worth watching. He'd learned to see structures this way the same year he'd learned to see people, not in pieces, but as whole systems where every part affected the others, where weakness in one area created stress elsewhere, where the visible surface only told half the story. It was why he was good at his work, why contractors called him for the difficult jobs, the renovation projects where someone else's mistakes needed correcting. It was also, Claire had told him during their last argument before she left, why he was impossible to live with. You look at me like I'm a house inspection, she'd said, voice sharp with 3 years of accumulated frustration. Like you're cataloging my flaws, figuring out what needs fixing. I'm not a project, Evan. I'm a person. He tried to explain that wasn't what he was doing, that he was just trying to understand, to see clearly, to know what was needed. But the words had come out wrong or not at all, and she'd left anyway, first to her sister's place, then to Portland with a man who worked in tech and wrote poetry and apparently knew how to talk about his feelings in a way that didn't sound like a weather report. She'd left Mira, too. Not officially, not legally. They shared custody on paper, alternating weekends and holidays, according to a schedule that looked fair in court documents, but fell apart in practice. Portland was 11 hours away by car. Claire sent birthday presents that arrived late and made video calls she often had to reschedule. Mira had stopped asking when Mommy was coming to visit about 18 months ago. Evan didn't blame her. Not anymore. Some people were built for partnership, for compromise, for the constant negotiation that relationship required. He'd thought he was. He tried to be. But in the end, he was better at building things than maintaining them, better with wood and nails than words and feelings, better alone. Except Danny didn't see it that way. And Mira definitely didn't see it that way. So here he sat at the worst table in the cafe with a woman who'd forgotten his name. He could tell by the way she kept avoiding using it, watching the sunlight fade while she texted her friends about someone else's crisis. "You know what?" Monica said suddenly, setting her phone down with the finality of someone making a decision. "I think I need to go help my girlfriend deal with this Airbnb thing. It's kind of an emergency." Relief and something like disappointment settled over Evan in equal measure. "Of course," he said, already reaching for his wallet. "Let me get— Oh, don't worry about it. I've got mine." She was already standing, slinging her designer purse over her shoulder with practiced ease. "This was fun, though. Really nice to meet you, Eric." Evan. But he didn't correct her, didn't see the point. "You too," he said, because it was easier than the truth. She was gone before he could stand, weaving between tables with her phone already back at her ear, laughing about something before she'd even cleared the patio. Evan watched her go, then looked down at his half-finished coffee, at the table with its water rings and uneven surface, at his hands that knew how to fix things but apparently couldn't hold on to people. The server, a college-age kid with sleeve tattoos and a kind face, appeared at his elbow. "Can I get you anything else, man? Maybe something stronger?" He said it gently, with the universal sympathy of someone who'd witnessed bad dates before. "No thanks. I'm good." Evan pulled out his wallet, left enough cash to cover both drinks and a generous tip. The server deserved it for having to watch that. "Rough one?" the kid asked, collecting the bills. "They can't all be winners." "Truth." The server hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, she was on her phone the whole time you were at the bar waiting, before she even sat down. Some people just aren't present, you know?" Evan nodded, appreciated the kindness even if it didn't change anything. He was still sitting alone at the worst table on the patio, still facing the drive home to an empty house where Mira wouldn't be back until tomorrow afternoon, still carrying the hollow feeling of having tried and failed at something that seemed effortless for everyone else. He should leave. Go home, maybe stop by the lumberyard on the way and pick up the cedar he needed for the Watson deck repair. Get an early start tomorrow morning before picking up Mira from Claire's parents. Productive. Purposeful. Better than sitting here dwelling on— "Excuse me." The voice came from his left, clear and calm and directed at him. Evan turned, surprised, and found himself looking at a woman seated at the next table. She was maybe late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that were genuinely looking at him, not through him or around him or at her phone. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, no jewelry except small silver earrings, and there was something in her posture, straight-backed but not stiff, present but not performative, that reminded him of the old craftsmen he'd learned from, the ones who didn't need to announce their competence because it showed in everything they did. "If you're free," she said, and there was no flirtation in it, no agenda he could detect, just a simple statement. "You should sit here instead." Evan blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry?" "This table." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "It's better. Better view, more stable, and—" She paused, a slight smile touching her lips. "The company will actually look at you when you talk." Heat crept up Evan's neck. Not embarrassment exactly, but the odd feeling of being seen when he'd thought he was invisible. He glanced around the patio, expecting this to be some kind of joke, a dare, something other than what it appeared to be. But the woman just waited, patient, her coffee cup cradled in both hands like she had all the time in the world, and no need to fill the silence while he decided. Evan Cole, who measured everything twice and committed only when he was certain, who hadn't made an impulsive decision since the night Mira was born and the midwife had placed her in his arms, and he'd known with absolute clarity that everything in his life now served this one purpose: protecting her, raising her, being enough, stood up. He picked up his coffee cup, left the worst table behind, and walked the 8 feet to where a stranger had offered something he hadn't realized he needed. A different chair. A better view. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, this day wasn't over yet. The chair was more solid than the one he'd left behind. Evan noticed it immediately as he sat down. The way it didn't wobble, the way the seat had been sanded smooth and refinished recently enough that he could still smell the faint trace of polyurethane. Details most people wouldn't notice, but details that told him someone cared about this place, maintained it with intention rather than waiting for things to break. The woman across from him set down her coffee cup and extended her hand. Lena Whitaker. I own this cafe, which means I've seen a lot of bad dates happen on this patio, but that one, she shook her head with something close to sympathy. That one was particularly painful to witness. Her handshake was firm, brief, professional. Evan took it, still slightly off balance from the strangeness of the situation. Evan Cole. And yeah, it wasn't my finest hour. Wasn't your fault, Lena said simply. Some people treat other people like intermissions between phone calls. You deserve better than that. She said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might point out that it was going to rain or that the soup needed salt. An observation, not a judgment. Evan didn't know what to say to that, so he took a sip of his coffee instead, buying time. From this angle, he had a better view of the cafe itself. A converted house, probably built in the 1920s based on the window proportions and the ornate corbels under the eaves. Someone had done a careful restoration, preserving the original charm while updating it for commercial use. The patio was an addition, maybe 10 years old, built to take advantage of the sloping lot and the view of the walking trail below. How long have you owned it? He asked, because it seemed safer than talking about the date or why she'd invited him over or any of the dozen questions crowding his mind. 4 years, bought it from the previous owner when she retired. Lena followed his gaze to the building, and something shifted in her expression, pride mixed with something heavier. It was my grandmother's favorite place. She used to bring me here when I was little, let me order hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, and tell me stories about when this whole area was farmland. When it went up for sale, I couldn't let it become a chain restaurant or get torn down for condos. So you bought it. So I emptied my savings, took out a loan that still keeps me up at night, and bought it. She smiled, but it was rueful. My accountant said I was insane. My family said I was having a midlife crisis at 34. They were probably both right. Evan understood that kind of decision, the kind that made sense in your gut, even when it didn't make sense on paper. He'd made a similar choice when Claire left, when he'd had to decide whether to sell the house they'd bought together or find a way to keep it for Mira's sake, to give her stability when everything else was falling apart. The mortgage was more than he should carry alone, but it was hers, the only home she'd ever known. It's a good building, he said, which wasn't what he meant but was all he could access. Someone did quality work on the restoration. Lena's eyebrows rose slightly. You can tell that just from sitting here? I work in structural carpentry. It's kind of automatic at this point. I look at buildings the way some people look at faces. He gestured toward the main structure. The window casings are original, but they've been properly maintained. The addition was done by someone who understood how to match the architectural style without trying to fake the age. And this patio... He paused, suddenly aware he might be about to criticize something she'd paid for. It's well built. But... Lena leaned forward slightly, alert in a way that reminded him of the good contractors he worked with, the ones who wanted to know the truth instead of comfortable lies. Evan hesitated. He'd learned the hard way that people didn't always want his observations, that pointing out structural issues could sound like criticism, like he was finding fault instead of simply seeing what was there. But Lena was watching him with an intensity that suggested she actually wanted to know, that she'd asked a real question and expected a real answer. There's some settling in the northwest corner, he said carefully. Could be normal ground movement, could be an issue with the footings or the support beams. And some of the decking boards are starting to gap more than they should, might just need tightening, might indicate moisture problems underneath. He expected her to deflect to assure him it was fine, that someone had looked at it recently, the usual responses people gave when you pointed out things they didn't want to deal with. Instead, Lena's expression went very still, very focused. "How bad?" she asked quietly. "I'd need to look underneath to know for sure. Could be minor, could be something that needs attention soon." He softened it slightly, not wanting to alarm her. "But it's not an emergency. Buildings talk if you know how to listen. This one's just mentioning something, not screaming about it." Lena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup in a slow, unconscious circle. The late afternoon light caught the threads of silver in her dark hair, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested she smiled often, but worried more. When she finally spoke, her voice was low enough that he had to lean in slightly to hear. "I know there are problems," she said. "I've known for a while. The health inspector came by 6 months ago and mentioned concerns about the deck structure. Said it wasn't immediately dangerous, but recommended I have it evaluated by a structural engineer." She met his eyes. "I haven't done it yet." "Why not?" "Because I'm terrified of what they'll find." The honesty in it was startling, undefended. "Because if they tell me it needs major repairs, I don't have the money. Business is good, better than I expected, honestly. But I sank everything into buying this place and the initial renovations. I'm still catching up, still trying to build a cushion. If they condemn the patio, even temporarily—" She shook her head. "60% of my revenue comes from outdoor seating. I'd have to close, or at least cut back so severely that I'm not sure I could make the loan payments." Evan understood that math, that brutal calculus of small business ownership where one unexpected expense could cascade into failure. He'd seen it happen to good contractors, skilled craftspeople who knew their trade but couldn't navigate the financial tightrope, who made one wrong bid or had one client default and lost everything. "So you're hoping it holds long enough to save up for repairs," he said, not judging, just understanding. "So I'm hoping it holds long enough that I can sell the place to someone with deeper pockets who can fix it properly." Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My accountant's advice, actually. Cut my losses while the business is still profitable, before something catastrophic happens. He says I'm bleeding money on deferred maintenance." "But you don't want to sell." "I really don't." She looked past him, toward the main building, and he could see the weight of it, the dream that had become a burden, the passion project that was slowly crushing her. "My grandmother died 2 years ago. Alzheimer's. At the end, she didn't remember much, but she remembered this place. She'd ask me if the cafe was still there, if people still came to sit on the patio and watch the sunset. I'd tell her yes, and she'd relax." Lena's voice went rough. "I told her I'd keep it going. I promised her." The sun was lower now, painting everything in that particular gold that only happened in the hour before dusk. Around them, the patio was filling up with the dinner crowd, couples sharing wine, friends laughing over appetizers, a man in the corner working on a laptop with the focused intensity of someone on deadline. Normal people having normal evenings, unaware that they were sitting on a structure that might be slowly failing, that the woman who'd built this place for them was quietly drowning in the effort to keep it alive. Evan knew that kind of promise, the kind you made to someone you loved that became both anchor and obligation. He'd made one to Mira the night she was born, sitting in the hospital room while Claire slept and his daughter, impossibly small, impossibly perfect, had gripped his finger with her entire hand. He'd promised her stability, safety, a father who would be there every single day, who would choose her over everything else, always. It had cost him his marriage. It had cost him a lot of things, but he'd kept it, would keep it, would build his entire life around that promise, even when it meant sitting alone at bad tables on worse dates, even when it meant being too tired and too quiet and too focused to be what anyone else needed. He understood Lena in that moment, understood her in a way that had nothing to do with attraction or possibility, and everything to do with recognizing someone else carrying weight they refused to set down. "I could look at it," he heard himself say. "The deck structure. No charge, just a professional assessment. Tell you what's actually going on underneath, what needs immediate attention versus what can wait, what order to tackle things if you decide to repair instead of sell." Lena studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You just met me. I literally pulled you away from a bad date 30 seconds ago. Why would you offer that? Because I'm good at what I do, and you need someone who's good at what they do. He kept his voice level, factual. Because I've spent 15 years learning how to see what's wrong with structures, and it seems wasteful to sit here knowing you're worried about something I could probably answer in an hour. And because he paused, searching for words that were true without being too much. Because you saw me sitting at that table and offered me something better. Seems fair to return the favor. By crawling under my deck for free on a Saturday? I've had worse Saturdays. That got a real laugh from her, surprising and genuine. A couple at a nearby table glanced over, smiled at the sound. Evan realized that Lena probably didn't laugh much these days. Not really. Not under the weight of what she was carrying. Okay, she said finally. But not for free. If you're going to give me professional advice, I'm paying you for your time. I may be broke, but I'm not a charity case. Fair enough. Standard consultation rate, which is $200 for the inspection, written assessment included. He named it automatically, the rate he charged for small jobs that didn't require a crew. If you decide to hire me for repairs after that, the consultation fee gets applied to the total. Lena nodded slowly, doing math in her head. He could see her measuring it against whatever resources she had, whatever she'd been setting aside. When? I'm picking up my daughter tomorrow afternoon, but I'm free in the morning. Could come by around 8 if that works, before you open. You have a daughter. Well, it wasn't a question, but there was something in the way she said it. Recognition, maybe, or respect. Mira. She's 7. Spends every other weekend with her grandparents while her mom's out of state. He offered the information carefully, aware that single fatherhood often got reactions. Sympathy he didn't want, judgment he'd learned to ignore, or the worst one, interest from women who saw him as a project or a rescue. But Lena just nodded the same way she'd nodded about the consultation rate. 8 works? I usually get here around 6 to start prep work anyway. The cafe doesn't open until 10 on Sundays, so we'll have plenty of time. They exchanged phone numbers, and Evan noticed that she typed his name into her contacts correctly, that she'd been listening when he introduced himself. Small thing, shouldn't matter, but after an hour of being called Eric by someone who couldn't be bothered to remember, it felt significant. The server appeared, different from the one who'd witnessed his date, an older woman with reading glasses on a chain and the efficient warmth of someone who'd been doing this work for decades. Can I get you two anything? Dinner menu just started. Lena glanced at Evan, a question in her eyes. He should say no, should head home, should stop extending this strange encounter into something more complicated. But his house was empty and his daughter was 2 hours away, and the woman across from him was the first person in months who'd looked at him like he was someone worth talking to instead of someone worth fixing or leaving. I could eat, he said. The butternut squash ravioli is incredible today, Lena told him. My chef made the pasta fresh this morning, and if you're not vegetarian, the short rib is falling off the bone tender. You don't eat here often, do you? The server smiled at Lena with obvious affection. Telling customers what to order instead of asking what they want. I'm trying to be helpful. You're trying to control the entire dining experience. The server turned to Evan. Don't let her bully you. Order whatever sounds good. Evan found himself smiling, drawn into the easy dynamic between them. Short rib sounds great, and maybe some of that ravioli to start? Good choice. Lena? The salmon. And yes, I know you're going to tell me I need to branch out and try new things, but I like what I like. Stubborn as always. The server collected their menus, patted Lena's shoulder with casual familiarity, and headed back inside. That's Margaret, Lena said. She worked here under the previous owner, stayed on when I took over. Basically runs the front of house while pretending I'm in charge. I'd be lost without her. She seems fond of you. She thinks I'm a disaster who needs constant supervision. But Lena said it with warmth, the kind that came from being known and accepted anyway. She's probably right. They fell into conversation the way water finds level, naturally, without force. Lena asked about his work, and Evan found himself actually explaining it, describing the satisfaction of framing a wall perfectly plumb, the puzzle-solving aspect of renovation where you had to understand what the original builder was thinking 50 or 100 years ago. She listened the way she'd listened before, with full attention, asking questions that showed she was actually processing what he said. When the food came, Lena insisted he try the ravioli first, watched his face as he tasted the delicate pasta with its sage brown butter sauce. It was exceptional, the kind of food that made you understand why people became obsessed with restaurants, why they'd drive across town or wait hours for a table. "This is really good," he said, which was inadequate but true. "My chef, Tom, is ridiculously talented. He could work anywhere, probably should work somewhere with a Michelin star and a wine cellar, but he likes it here. Says corporate kitchens made him forget why he loved cooking." She took a bite of her salmon, closed her eyes briefly in appreciation. "I'm terrified he'll leave. If I lose the patio and have to cut back, I probably can't keep him on full time." There it was again. The weight. The worry that kept circling back no matter how pleasant the conversation. Evan recognized it because he lived with his own version, the constant low-grade anxiety of single parenthood where everything was always one disaster away from falling apart. One injury on the job site that kept him from working, one major car repair he couldn't afford, one illness that Mira's grandparents couldn't handle that would force him to choose between her and a paycheck. "Tell me about Mira," Lena said, as if sensing his thoughts. "What's she like?" "Intense." The word came immediately. Felt right. She commits completely to whatever she's interested in. Dinosaurs currently. Last month it was marine biology. Before that, astronomy. She reads at a 5th grade level and builds Lego sets meant for kids twice her age and asks questions I have to Google because I have no idea how to explain plate tectonics to a 7-year-old. She sounds amazing. She is. She's also stubborn and particular and has very strong opinions about things like which socks have the right texture and whether sandwiches taste better cut diagonally or straight across. He felt himself smiling despite the exhaustion that always came with talking about Mira, the bone-deep tiredness of loving someone that much. "She's a lot like me," which her grandparents point out constantly, usually as a warning. "Do they help out a lot?" Her grandparents? "Every other weekend and some weeknights when I'm on a big job. They're good people, better than I probably deserve after the divorce. They could have made things difficult, taken Claire's side completely, but they've been—" He searched for the right word. "Fair, present. They love Mira, show up for her, which is more than her own mother manages most of the time." He hadn't meant to say that last part, hadn't meant to let the bitterness show. But Lena didn't flinch from it, didn't rush to defend Claire or suggest there must be another side to the story. "That must be hard," she said quietly, "being the one who stays." It's the only option that made sense. Mira needed stability. She needed one parent who would be there every day, every morning, every bedtime. I couldn't be the one who left. He looked down at his plate, at the short rib that was as tender as promised. Claire needed something different, someone different. I don't blame her for that anymore. But you did once. For about a year, yeah. I was angry at her for leaving, angry at myself for not being enough to make her stay. Then I realized I was wasting energy I needed for Mira, and the anger just became irrelevant. He met Lena's eyes. Now I just try to build a good life for my daughter and not think too hard about what I lost in the process. The sun had set while they talked, the sky fading from gold to deep blue. Around them, the patio lights came on. String lights overhead and small lanterns on each table, creating pockets of warm light in the gathering dark. It was beautiful, intimate, the kind of ambiance that people paid good money for, the kind of thing that would disappear if the deck failed and the cafe lost this space. "What about you?" Evan asked. "How did you end up in the restaurant business? This wasn't your first career, was it?" Lena laughed. "God, no. I was a high school English teacher for 10 years. Loved it, was good at it, had tenure and benefits and a pension plan. Then my grandmother started declining and I started coming here more often, helping the old owner, remembering why I'd loved this place as a kid." She swirled her wine. She'd ordered a glass with dinner, something red that the server had recommended. "The more time I spent here, the more I realized I was just going through the motions at school. Great job, important work, but I wasn't present for it anymore. I was dreaming about coffee blends and seasonal menus and what it would feel like to build something that was mine." "So you walked away from security for a dream." "So I had a complete breakdown of common sense and emptied my 401k to buy a struggling cafe in a competitive market." She raised her glass in a mock toast. My therapist says I have issues with risk assessment and possibly a savior complex. Do you regret it? The question hung between them, serious despite the lightness in their tone. Lena considered it, really considered it, staring into her wine like it might have answers. Ask me again when I'm not facing a potential debt collapse and financial ruin, she said finally. But honestly, even with all of it, the stress, the money problems, the constant worry that I'm going to fail and prove everyone right who said this was a terrible idea, I still wake up excited to come here most days. I still get a thrill when customers tell me they drove an hour because they heard the food was worth it. I still feel like I'm doing something that matters, even if it's just providing good coffee and a nice view. That's not just, Evan said. Places like this, they matter. They're where people celebrate and mourn and fall in love and break up and decide what to do with their lives. You're building community space, not just selling food. Is that what you tell yourself when you're framing houses? That you're building more than walls? Actually, yeah. He said it seriously, without embarrassment. Every house I frame is going to be someone's home. Someone's going to wake up there on Christmas morning, teach their kids to ride bikes in the driveway, sit on the porch when they're old and watch the neighborhood change. The work matters because it lasts, because it holds people's lives. He paused, then added quietly, "It's the one thing I know I'm good at. Building things that don't fall down." Lena set down her wine glass and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "You're a rare person, Evan Cole." "I'm really not. I'm about as ordinary as they come." "No," she said firmly. "Ordinary people don't notice structural settling from across a patio. Ordinary people don't offer to spend their Saturday morning crawling under a stranger's deck. Ordinary people don't talk about their work like it's a calling." She leaned forward slightly, her voice going softer. "And ordinary people definitely don't leave a bad date this gracefully." Heat crept up his neck again, that uncomfortable awareness of being seen too clearly. He wanted to deflect, to make a joke, to do something to ease the intensity of the moment. But Lena was still watching him with those steady eyes, and he found he didn't want to look away. "For what it's worth," he said, "this is the best meal I've had in months, and the best conversation I've had in longer than that. Even though I spent half of it complaining about my failing business? You weren't complaining. You were being honest about something difficult. There's a difference." Margaret reappeared to clear their plates, asked if they wanted dessert. They both declined. Evan because he was genuinely full, Lena because she admitted she tasted desserts all day during prep and couldn't stomach them by evening. They sat with coffee instead, watching the last customers filter out, the patio slowly emptying as the night deepened. Evan should go. He had an early morning, needed to review the plans for the Watson deck before the inspection tomorrow, but he found himself reluctant to stand, to end this strange evening that had started so poorly and turned into something he couldn't quite categorize. Not a date. They'd both been clear about that, the way two careful people who'd been hurt could be clear. But not nothing either. "I should let you close up," he said finally, checking his phone and finding it was nearly 9. "I didn't mean to keep you this long." "You didn't keep me. I stayed." Lena stood, started gathering the coffee cups herself before Margaret could swoop in. "Walk you out?" They went through the cafe's interior, through the dining room with its exposed brick walls and vintage light fixtures and framed photographs of what the building had looked like in various decades. Lena pointed out details as they walked: the original tin ceiling they'd uncovered during renovation, the fireplace that had been bricked over and opened up, the built-in shelving that had survived 100 years of different owners. "You really love this place," Evan observed. "I really do, for better or worse." She held the front door open for him, and they stepped out into the parking lot where his truck sat alone under a streetlight. "Thank you for dinner, for the company, for not thinking I'm completely insane for buying a money pit and then being too scared to fix it properly." "I don't think you're insane. I think you're brave." He said it simply, stating a fact. "And tomorrow, I'll tell you exactly what's going on with your deck, and we'll figure out what comes next. Just like that? Just like that. One problem at a time, one board at a time. It's the only way anything gets built." Lena smiled, and under the parking lot lights he could see the hope in it, fragile but real. "See you at 8? I'll be here." He climbed into his truck, started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot with Lena still standing by the door, watching him go. In his rear-view mirror, he could see the cafe glowing against the dark, warm light spilling from the windows. The patio empty now, but still beautiful. Evan drove home thinking about settling foundations and deferred maintenance, about promises made to dying grandmothers and small daughters, about the weight of building something meant to last. He thought about a woman who'd seen him sitting at the worst table and offered him a better one, who'd shared her fear and her hope with equal honesty, who ran toward her dreams even when they were crushing her. He thought about how sometimes the most important structural work wasn't about the building at all, but about the people trying to hold it up. When he pulled into his driveway, the house was dark and empty, like he'd known it would be. But for the first time in a long time, the emptiness didn't feel quite so heavy. He had work tomorrow, real work that mattered, and after that he'd pick up Mira and hear about her weekend and make her favorite dinner and tuck her in and read 3 chapters of whatever book they were on because she always negotiated for more than the agreed-upon 2. His life was full, he realized, not in the ways people usually meant, not with romance or social calendars or the kind of happiness that made good photographs, but full in the ways that counted, with purpose and presence and the quiet satisfaction of building things that held. Tomorrow he'd crawl under a deck and tell a near stranger the truth about what was failing and what could be saved. Tonight he'd sit in his empty house and feel okay about that, about all of it, about the strange path that had led him from the worst table to the best conversation to this moment of unexpected peace. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. Evan arrived at 7:45 the next morning with his truck bed full of equipment he hoped he wouldn't need. Jack stands, moisture meters, a cordless drill, his good flashlight, and the worn leather tool belt his father had given him when he'd started his apprenticeship. The cafe parking lot was empty except for a silver Honda that he guessed was Lena's. The morning air was cool and damp, carrying the smell of coffee and fresh bread from inside the building. He was lifting his toolbox from the truck when the front door opened and Lena appeared, wearing jeans and an old sweatshirt with faded letters that might once have spelled something about a 5K run. Her hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail as yesterday, and she carried 2 travel mugs that steamed in the morning chill. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering him one. "Fair warning, it's strong enough to strip paint. Tom makes it for the kitchen crew when we have early prep days." Evan accepted it gratefully, took a sip, and felt the coffee hit his system like a friendly punch. "That's perfect, thank you." "Did you eat? I have pastries inside. Tom's been experimenting with a new croissant recipe, and we have about 2 dozen that need eating before they go stale. I grabbed something at home, but I won't say no to a croissant later." He set down his toolbox, pulled out a clipboard and a digital camera. "Before I get under there, I want to do a visual inspection from above, take some measurements, get a sense of the overall structure." Lena led him around to the patio, and in the morning light it looked different than it had last night. Less romantic, more functional. The wood was weathered gray in places, darker where water pooled, and he could see the gaps between boards more clearly now, some of them wide enough to fit a pencil through. The furniture had been cleared away already, stacked neatly along one side. "I moved everything after we closed last night," Lena explained. "Figured you'd need the space clear." "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but I wanted to help, and moving chairs is about the limit of my construction skills." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, watching as he knelt down to examine the surface. "How bad does it look?" "Give me time to actually look before I diagnose anything." But he said it gently, understanding the anxiety behind the question. He'd felt it himself every time Mira's pediatrician examined her, that desperate need to know immediately that everything was okay. He worked methodically, the way he'd been trained, starting at one corner and moving in a grid pattern, checking each board, each connection, photographing anything unusual. Lena stayed quiet, sipping her coffee and watching without hovering, which he appreciated. Some clients couldn't stop talking, filling every silence with nervous chatter or questions he couldn't answer yet. But Lena seemed to understand that inspection required concentration, that some work needed space. After 20 minutes on the surface, Evan moved to the perimeter, examining the support structure from what he could see without going underneath. The posts were sound, the ledger board properly flashed and attached to the main building, the joists spaced correctly for the span. Someone had built this deck right, which was encouraging, but that didn't mean time and weather hadn't found the weaknesses anyway. I need to get underneath now, he said, standing and brushing off his knees. The access is from the lower level, right? Down by the walking trail? Yeah, there's a gate in the fence. I'll show you. They walked down the sloped lawn to where the property dropped off more steeply, creating the space beneath the deck. Lena unlocked a wooden gate that was mostly decorative, designed to keep wandering hikers from getting too curious about the cafe's foundation. Beyond it, the ground was a mix of gravel and hard-packed dirt, shadowed and cool even though the sun was climbing higher. Evan pulled his flashlight from his belt, clicked it on, and stepped into the space beneath the patio. It was taller than he'd expected, maybe 5 feet at the highest point, enough to move around without crouching constantly. He could smell the earth, the treated lumber, and underneath it all, something else, something organic and wrong. Lena had followed him in, ducking slightly even though she had clearance. What are you looking for? Rot, first, then I'll check for insect damage, foundation settling, any signs that the structure is compromised. He moved his flashlight across the floor joist slowly, looking for the telltale signs. Wood that looked darker than it should, areas where the grain had separated, places where the structural integrity had been eaten away by moisture or time. He found it in the northwest corner, exactly where he'd suspected from the slight sag he'd noticed yesterday. 3 joists showed significant decay, the wood soft and crumbling when he pressed his thumb against it. The beam they rested on was worse, a major support that had been slowly rotting for what looked like years, concealed by the fact that everything above it still looked functional. Evan? Lena's voice was tight. What is it? Come here. I want to show you something. He waited until she was beside him, then directed his flashlight at the damaged beam. See how the wood looks stringy here? How it's separated into these vertical fibers? That's advanced rot. The structural integrity is completely compromised. Lena was quiet for a long moment, staring at the beam. In the harsh light of the flashlight, her face looked pale, strained. How compromised? This beam is supporting roughly 1/3 of the patio's weight. Right now it's holding because the load is distributed across multiple joists, but it's failing. Could be tomorrow, could be 6 months from now, but eventually it will give out completely. He moved the light to show her the full extent. When it does, that whole section of deck will collapse. If there are people up there when it happens, customers, staff, anyone, they could be seriously hurt. Oh God. Lena's hand came up to her mouth. I knew it was bad, but I hoped it was just cosmetic issues, surface stuff, not this. Evan continued his inspection, finding more problems the deeper he looked. Water damage where the gutters had been overflowing and pooling against the joists. Several posts showing signs of settling, their concrete footings cracked and insufficient for the load. Hardware that had rusted through, connections that were barely holding. The deck was a disaster waiting to happen, held together by luck and the fact that catastrophic failure takes time. When he finally emerged back into the sunlight, Lena was already there, sitting on the grass with her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up as he approached, and he could see she'd been crying, not dramatically, just the quiet kind of tears that come when you're alone and the truth is finally unavoidable. Tell me, she said. All of it. I need to know. Evan sat down beside her, set his flashlight aside, pulled out his phone to show her the photos he'd taken. He walked her through each issue, explaining in clear terms what was wrong, why it mattered, what the risks were. He didn't soften it because she deserved the truth, but he didn't make it worse than it was either. Just the facts, just what he'd found, delivered as gently as he could manage. Bottom line, he said finally, this patio needs to be closed immediately. Today. It's not safe for occupancy, and if someone gets hurt, you'll be liable. Beyond that, you need emergency repairs to stabilize the structure, then a complete rebuild of the damaged sections. How much? Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. Evan had been doing rough calculations while he inspected, pricing out materials and labor in his head. Emergency stabilization, maybe $3,000 if I do it myself with minimal help. That'll make it safe, but not usable. Full repair, replacing all the compromised lumber and bringing everything up to current code, you're looking at $15,000 to $20,000 depending on materials. I don't have $20,000. She said it flatly, without drama. I don't have $15,000. I barely have the $3,000 for stabilization. and that's only if I skip my loan payment this month, which will trigger penalties and possibly a default notice. There might be ways to phase the work, do critical repairs first, and no, Lena cut him off, still staring at the photos on his phone. You just told me it's not safe. I can't serve customers on a patio that might collapse. I can't ask my staff to work somewhere dangerous. I have to close it, which means I lose 60% of my revenue, which means I can't make payroll, can't pay my suppliers, can't keep the business running. She looked at him, and the devastation in her eyes was worse than tears. I'm going to lose the cafe. You don't know that. There are options, small business loans, maybe the city has grants for historic preservation. I'm already maxed out on loans. The building isn't technically historic, close, but 10 years too new for the designation. And even if I could find funding, the process takes months. I don't have months. She stood abruptly, started pacing. I need to call my staff, tell them what's happening, and my accountant, and probably a bankruptcy attorney, because that's where this is headed. Evan stood too, his mind racing through possibilities, solutions, ways to fix this that didn't end with Lena losing everything she'd built. What if we could buy you time? Close the patio, but stay open for indoor dining while we figure out financing. Indoor seats, 40 people maximum. I need 80 to break even, 100 to actually make money. The whole appeal of this place is the outdoor space. People book reservations weeks in advance for patio tables. She shook her head. Without it, I'm just another cafe in a town that has 24 cafes. Before Evan could respond, the sound of tires on gravel made them both turn. A white sedan was pulling into the parking lot, official-looking, with a city seal on the door. Lena's face went even paler. That's a city vehicle, she said. Why is there a city vehicle here on a Sunday morning? They walked back up to the parking lot as a man in business casual clothes emerged from the sedan, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who didn't want to be there any more than they wanted him there. He was maybe 50, balding, with the kind of carefully maintained neutrality that came from delivering bad news professionally. Lena Whitaker? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. That's me. Lena's voice was steady, but Evan could see her hands shaking slightly at her sides. Martin Chen, City Building Department. I'm sorry to show up unannounced on a weekend, but we received a complaint about your patio structure. Anonymous tip called in Friday afternoon claiming there were visible structural issues and public safety concerns. He glanced at Evan, taking in the tool belt and work clothes. I'm going to need to conduct an immediate inspection. I've already inspected it, Evan said, stepping forward. I'm a licensed contractor, Evan Cole, Cole Structural Carpentry. I can show you my credentials and my findings. Martin's expression didn't change. I appreciate that, Mr. Cole, but I need to conduct my own inspection for the city's records. If you've already done the work, this should go quickly. He looked at Lena. I'm going to need access to the structure, above and below. What happened next felt like watching something break in slow motion. Martin went through the same inspection Evan had done, but with the cold efficiency of someone who was checking boxes on a form rather than solving problems. He took his own photos, made his own notes, asked technical questions that Lena couldn't answer, and Evan answered carefully, not wanting to make things worse. After 45 minutes, Martin returned to his car, entered information into his tablet, and printed out a document on a portable printer he kept in his trunk. He handed it to Lena with an expression that might have been sympathetic under different circumstances. Based on my inspection, I'm issuing an immediate closure order for your exterior dining area, he said. The structure shows significant structural compromise and poses an imminent danger to public safety. The patio must be vacated immediately and barricaded to prevent access. No occupancy is permitted until repairs are completed and inspected by a certified structural engineer. When can I reopen it? Lena's voice was small, already knowing the answer. That depends on when you complete the necessary repairs and pass inspection. The order outlines the specific code violations that need to be addressed. Martin hesitated, then added more quietly, I'm sorry, Ms. Whitaker. I know this is difficult, but the safety concerns are legitimate. If someone was injured because we didn't act on a complaint, the liability would fall on the city, as well as on you. I understand. Lena took the document without looking at it. Thank you for coming out. Martin nodded, climbed back into his sedan, and drove away, leaving them standing in the parking lot with the morning sun now bright and cheerful overhead, mocking the disaster unfolding beneath it. Lena read through the closure order slowly, her face getting more drawn with each line. When she finished, she looked at Evan with eyes that had gone from devastated to something harder, more resigned. "He's right," she said. "This is my fault. I knew there were problems and I didn't deal with them, and now someone's complained and the city's involved and I can't just ignore it anymore." She folded the document carefully, precisely. "I need to make some calls. Thank you for coming out for the inspection. I'll pay you the consultation fee like we agreed." "Lena, I mean it. You did the work. You should be paid. I'll write you a check." She started walking toward the cafe entrance, her shoulders rigid with the effort of holding herself together. Evan watched her go, his mind still churning through the problem, refusing to accept that there wasn't a solution. He'd spent 15 years fixing things other people said couldn't be fixed, finding ways to save structures that seemed too far gone. There had to be something, some approach they hadn't considered yet. He followed her inside where she was already at the register, pulling out a checkbook from a drawer underneath. Her hands were steady now, moving through familiar motions. Date, payee, amount, signature. Autopilot. "This isn't over," Evan said as she handed him the check. "Yes, it is. I just haven't accepted it yet." Lena's smile was tired, sad, but genuine. "You tried to help. I appreciate that more than I can say. But some problems don't have solutions. They just have consequences." The front door opened before Evan could respond, and an older couple walked in, clearly expecting the cafe to be open. The man looked confused, checking his watch. "Sorry," Lena said immediately, her customer service voice clicking into place. "We're not quite ready yet. Won't be open for another couple hours. Can I offer you coffee to go while you wait? No charge." "We had a reservation," the woman said, pulling out her phone to show the confirmation. 10 o'clock patio seating, anniversary brunch. We drove an hour to get here." Lena's professional mask cracked slightly, but she held it together. "I'm so sorry, but we've had an unexpected issue with our patio. It's not available for seating today. I can offer you indoor dining when we open, or if you prefer, I can recommend some other—" "We wanted the patio specifically," the man interrupted, frustration bleeding into his tone. "That's the whole point. The view, the atmosphere. We've been planning this for weeks. I understand, and I'm truly sorry. This was beyond my control. There's a structural issue that came up suddenly, and the city has ordered it closed for safety reasons." Lena was doing math in her head. Evan could see it. "I'd like to offer you a full brunch on the house when you're able to return, once the patio reopens. My way of apologizing for the inconvenience." The couple exchanged looks, clearly unhappy but mollified slightly by the offer. They took Lena's card, made a non-committal sound about maybe coming back, and left. Through the window, Evan watched them pull out their phones, probably canceling their plans, probably telling their friends about the disappointing cafe that couldn't even honor reservations. "That's going to happen all day," Lena said quietly, still staring at the door. "People with reservations showing up, expecting the patio, being disappointed. And then they'll leave reviews saying we're unreliable, that we don't honor bookings. And even when I do fix this, if I fix this, those reviews will still be there, driving away business." Her phone started ringing, then it rang again, then a third time. Reservation cancellations, Evan guessed. People who'd seen the closure notice or heard from friends. The damage was already spreading, reputation deteriorating in real time. Lena silenced her phone, set it face down on the counter. "I need to call my staff, let them know what's happening before they show up for their shifts. Some of them rely on this job. Margaret's a single grandmother raising 2 kids. Tom's paying off culinary school loans. Carlos just started saving for his own place." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm going to have to cut their hours or let them go entirely, and there's not enough work in this town for all of them to find something else quickly." "What if there was a way to fix this?" Evan heard himself say. "Not eventually, not in a few months, but now. This week." Lena looked at him like he was speaking a different language. "That's not possible. You said $20,000 for repairs, plus however much it costs to hire an engineer for the inspection. I don't have that kind of money, and even if I could borrow it somehow, contractors are booked weeks or months in advance. You can't just rebuild a deck in a few days." You can if you're willing to work around the clock and you have someone who knows what they're doing. Evan's mind was already planning it. Materials he'd need, which suppliers might extend him credit, he could transfer to her account. How many hours of work it would actually take if he didn't stop. I could start stabilization today, emergency shoring to make sure nothing collapses while we wait for materials. Then we start the rebuild. I'll pull the permits, handle the inspections, coordinate everything. Evan, I can't afford to pay you for that kind of work. I just told you I don't have the money. So don't pay me, not up front. He was working it out as he spoke, finding the path through the problem. I'll cover the materials on credit, do the labor myself. When the patio's open again and you're making money, you pay me back in installments. Whatever you can afford monthly until it's covered. That could take years. Then it takes years. I'm not going anywhere. Lena stared at him, and he could see her trying to process the offer, looking for the angle, the catch, the reason why a near stranger would suggest something so financially risky. Why would you do that? You barely know me. This isn't your problem. Evan thought about how to answer that, searching for words that would make sense to someone else when they barely made sense to him. He thought about the worst table and the better one she'd offered. He thought about promises made to dying grandmothers and small daughters. He thought about what it meant to build something designed to last, and how that didn't just apply to structures made of wood and nails. Because you saw me sitting at that table yesterday and you offered me something better, he said finally. Because you trusted me enough to tell me the truth about your problems instead of pretending everything was fine. Because I'm good at what I do, and it seems wasteful to watch something worth saving fall apart when I have the skills to fix it. He held her gaze. And because I think if our situations were reversed, you'd do the same thing. You'd find a way to help, even if it was risky and maybe foolish, and definitely not the smart business decision. You're right, Lena said softly. I absolutely would, which is probably why I'm in this mess in the first place. So let me be the same kind of foolish. Let me help. This is insane. You could lose thousands of dollars if I can't pay you back. The cafe could still fail, and then you'd be out the materials and the labor, and you'd have nothing to show for it but a tax write-off and regret. Or, Evan said, the cafe stays open, you keep your staff employed, your grandmother's legacy survives, and I get paid back over time while knowing I did work that mattered. That seems like a fair gamble. Lena's phone rang again. She glanced at it. Margaret calling, probably wondering why there was a city vehicle in the parking lot earlier. The real world pressing in, demanding decisions, not allowing time for careful consideration. If we do this, Lena said, her voice taking on a firmness that suggested she was committing even as she listed conditions. You write up a proper contract, payment terms, timeline, everything legal and documented. I'm not accepting charity, and I won't have you able to claim later that I took advantage. Deal. And you let me help. I can't do the skilled work, but I can hand you tools, move lumber, clean up, whatever you need. I'm not standing around watching someone else save my business. I was counting on that. And if at any point this becomes too much, too expensive, too time-consuming, too anything, you tell me and we stop. I won't let you destroy your own finances trying to rescue mine. Evan almost smiled at that, at the way she was trying to protect him even while accepting his help. Agreed. Anything else? Yeah. Lena looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, gratitude and disbelief and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Why aren't you running? Why aren't you backing away from the crazy cafe owner with the collapsing deck and the financial disaster? What kind of person volunteers for this? The kind who spent 3 years learning that the things worth having are usually the things you have to fight for, Evan said quietly. The kind who'd rather try and fail than walk away and wonder. The kind who... He stopped, suddenly aware of how close to truth he was getting, how much he was revealing. The kind who's too stubborn to accept that some problems don't have solutions. Lena held his gaze for a long moment, and Evan felt something shift between them, some understanding passing that didn't need words. Then she held out her hand, professional, formal, sealing an agreement that was anything but. Okay, she said, let's save this place. They shook on it there in the cafe, with the morning light streaming through the windows, and Lena's phone still buzzing with cancellations and disaster waiting just outside. They shook on impossible timelines and risky financing, and the kind of foolish optimism that either built something lasting or collapsed spectacularly with everyone buried in the rubble. Evan released her hand and immediately started making lists in his head: materials, tools, timeline, permits. He pulled out his phone, started texting suppliers he'd worked with for years, calling in favors and checking on inventory. Lena answered her phone, explained the situation to Margaret with admirable calm, started making her own lists of reservations to cancel and staff to notify. They worked side by side for the next hour, Lena on the phone and Evan coordinating deliveries, until the cafe looked less like a dream and more like a construction site, which was, Evan supposed, exactly what it needed to be. Around noon, his phone rang. Danny, probably wondering where he was since he'd mentioned maybe stopping by before picking up Mira. Evan stepped outside to take the call, leaving Lena to handle another disappointed customer. "Where are you?" Danny asked immediately. "I drove past your house. Truck's gone. Please tell me you're not still on that date from yesterday." "Different kind of date. I'm at the Riverside Cafe. The owner needs structural work done, and I'm helping." There was a pause. "The owner? The woman from yesterday?" "Lena, yeah. And you're helping her on a Sunday, the Sunday you're supposed to be picking up Mira in—" Papers rustling, Danny checking the time. 3 hours. "I'll make it. I just need to get the emergency stabilization started. Make sure the structure's safe before I leave." "Evan?" Danny's voice took on that particular tone, the one that meant he was about to say something his brother wouldn't want to hear. "What are you doing? You don't know this woman. You don't owe her anything. And you definitely don't have time to take on a major project when you're already working 50-hour weeks and raising a kid alone." "I know what I'm doing." "Do you? Because from here it looks like you met someone who needed help, and you immediately volunteered to fix all her problems, which is what you always do, and which always ends with you exhausted and disappointed when people don't appreciate it the way you think they should." Evan closed his eyes, fought down the flash of irritation. Danny meant well. Danny always meant well. But he couldn't understand what Evan had recognized in Lena yesterday. Someone trying to hold up something too heavy alone. Someone who'd made promises they were determined to keep, even if it destroyed them. "This is different," Evan said. "That's what you said about Claire. That's what you said about Dad's business when he was failing. That's what you said about—" "This is different because I'm going into it with clear terms and realistic expectations. I'm not trying to save her. I'm helping her save herself. There's a distinction." Danny sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. "Just promise me you're not doing this because you're lonely. Promise me this isn't about the bad date yesterday making you feel like you need to prove something." "It's not about that." "Then what is it about?" Evan looked back at the cafe, where Lena was visible through the window, talking on her phone with that determined set to her shoulders, refusing to collapse, even though her world was falling apart. He thought about what he'd told her earlier, about building things designed to last, about the work mattering because it held people's lives. "It's about doing what I'm good at for someone who deserves it," he said finally. "It's about Mira watching me be the kind of person who helps when he can, who doesn't turn away from hard things just because they're hard. And it's about—" He struggled for the rest. "It's about maybe building something that isn't just for her for once. Something that's mine." Danny was quiet for so long that Evan checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, his brother said, "Okay, but I'm holding you to that timeline. You'd better be at Mom and Dad's by 3 to get Mira. She's been talking about seeing you all weekend." "I'll be there." "And Evan, write up that contract she mentioned. Protect yourself legally, even if you trust her, especially if you trust her." "I will." "Thanks, Danny." He ended the call and stood for a moment in the parking lot, letting himself feel the magnitude of what he'd just committed to. Weeks of work, maybe months, thousands of dollars in materials and labor. The risk of financial loss if Lena couldn't pay him back. The risk of something else, something harder to name, if he let himself care too much about whether this cafe survived. But he'd made the offer, shaken on it, and Evan Cole didn't back out of commitments once made. Forward motion, one board at a time, building until the structure held. He went back inside to find Lena waiting, her phone finally silent, her expression exhausted but determined. I canceled everything through next weekend, she said. Told people we're doing emergency repairs and we'll reopen once it's safe. Margaret's coming in tomorrow to help coordinate, and Tom said he'll adjust his schedule to match whatever hours we can actually be open. She took a breath. I also called my accountant, told him what we're doing. He said I'm insane, but he'll draw up a payment contract if you're serious. I'm serious. Then I guess we're doing this. Lena looked at the patio through the window, at the structure that was both disaster and opportunity. Where do we start? Evan felt something settle in his chest, that familiar calm that came when the path forward was clear. We start with shoring up what's failing so nothing collapses. Then we strip away everything that's compromised. Then we rebuild, piece by piece, until it's stronger than it was before. Sounds like a metaphor. Sounds like Sunday afternoon, Evan corrected, already moving toward his truck to unload the jack stands and support posts. Come on, we've got work to do. And they did. Hours of it, hard and dirty and precise. They worked through lunch, through the heat of midday, through Evan's carefully maintained timeline, until he absolutely had to leave to pick up Mira. By the time he loaded his tools back into the truck, the patio was braced and barricaded, safe if not usable, held up by temporary supports that would keep it standing while they figured out the permanent solution. Lena walked him to his truck, sawdust in her hair and exhaustion in her eyes, but something else too. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of hope. Thank you, she said, for today, for all of it. Thank me when the deck's done and the cafe's full again. Evan climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine. I'll be back tomorrow morning, early. We'll start the real work then. I'll be here? He drove away watching her in his rearview mirror, standing in the parking lot of a cafe that might fail or might survive, depending on what they built in the coming weeks. He drove toward his daughter and the simple, uncomplicated joy of being her father, the part of his life that made sense when nothing else did. But in the back of his mind, he was already planning tomorrow's work, already seeing the finished deck, already committed to a project that was about so much more than wood and nails. He was building something designed to last. He just wasn't entirely sure anymore what that something was. Mira was waiting on the front porch when Evan pulled into his former in-law's driveway at 2:58, her backpack already on and her favorite stuffed velociraptor clutched under one arm. She launched herself down the steps the moment his truck stopped, all 70 pounds of 7-year-old energy and excitement. Dad, Grandma let me help make cookies and I only burned one batch, and Grandpa taught me about constellations. And did you know that Orion is actually a hunter and not just random stars? I drew you a picture of the whole myth. Evan caught her in a hug that lifted her off the ground, breathing in the smell of her shampoo and cookie dough and the particular sweetness that was just Mira. Sounds like you had a good weekend. The best. But I missed you. Did you miss me? Every second. He set her down, looked past her to where Claire's mother stood in the doorway, smiling that soft smile that always made him feel both grateful and guilty. Thanks for watching her, Linda. You know we love having her. She's welcome anytime. Linda came down the steps, handed him Mira's overnight bag and a Tupperware container that he knew would be full of cookies. How was your weekend? Danny mentioned you had a date? Of course Danny had mentioned it. His brother had probably given Linda a full report, complete with analysis and predictions. It was fine. Met someone interesting, actually. She owns the Riverside Cafe. Oh, I love that place. Haven't been in a while, but the patio is gorgeous. Linda's expression shifted slightly, that particular look of motherly concern she'd perfected over the years. Danny said she needed some work done? Structural repairs on the deck. I'm helping her out. That's kind of you. She said it simply, without the skepticism Danny had shown, and Evan felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. Linda had always been generous with him, even after the divorce, even when she had every right to take her daughter's side and shut him out. Well, don't work too hard. You've got this one to take care of. She ruffled Mira's hair affectionately. I know, always. He buckled Mira into her booster seat, waved goodbye to Linda, and pointed the truck toward home with his daughter already talking a mile a minute about everything she'd done, seen, and learned over the weekend. By the time they got home, made dinner, did homework, and went through the extended bedtime routine that Mira had perfected to an art form, it was nearly 9. Evan stood in her doorway watching her sleep, her velociraptor tucked under her chin and her dark hair spread across the pillow. She looked like Claire in those moments, had her mother's delicate features and sharp intelligence, but her stubbornness was all his. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Lena. Lumberyard confirmed delivery for Tuesday a.m. Tom says he'll cover breakfast service solo if you need me on the deck. Margaret is drafting new reservation system for indoor only. This is really happening. Evan typed back. 6 a.m. start tomorrow. Bring work gloves and caffeine. Her response came immediately. Already bought both. Thank you again. For everything? He wanted to tell her she didn't need to keep thanking him, that he'd made a choice and he stood by his choices. But that felt too heavy for a text message, so he just sent back a thumbs-up emoji and headed to his own room, where he'd spend the next hour reviewing building codes and sketching out the rebuild plan before exhaustion finally pulled him under. The alarm went off at 5. Evan dressed in the dark, made coffee strong enough to taste like determination, and was pulling into the cafe parking lot just as the first gray light touched the eastern sky. Lena's car was already there, the cafe windows glowing warm against the pre-dawn chill. She met him at the door with 2 travel mugs and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept much either. Morning, fair warning, I may have overdone it on the coffee. My hands are already shaking. Perfect. Means you're ready to work. Evan accepted the mug, took a long drink of coffee that was indeed brutally strong. We're starting with demolition today, pulling up all the compromised decking, removing the rotted joists and that main support beam. It's going to look worse before it looks better. Story of my life lately. But Lena smiled as she said it, pulling on the work gloves she'd mentioned buying. They were bright yellow, clearly brand new, probably from the hardware store up the street. Where do you need me? They worked in the cool morning air, Evan showing Lena how to safely remove decking boards without damaging the ones they could salvage, where to stack materials for disposal versus reuse. She learned quickly, didn't complain when the work was hard or tedious, asked questions that showed she was actually trying to understand rather than just following orders. By 8, they'd pulled up a quarter of the deck surface, exposing the support structure beneath in all its damaged glory. Lena stood at the edge looking down at the mess, and Evan could see her doing the math. How much worse it looked now. How impossible the task seemed when you could see all of it at once. This is going to work, right? She asked quietly. I'm not just destroying what I have left for nothing? It's going to work. Sometimes you have to tear down to rebuild. Evan pulled another board loose, added it to the scrap pile. Trust the process. I barely know the process. Then trust me. She looked at him for a long moment, sawdust caught in her hair and doubt written across her face. Then she nodded, picked up the pry bar again, and went back to work. Trust, Evan knew, wasn't something you said. It was something you did, board by board, hour by hour, showing up even when you weren't sure. They worked through the morning, through the sound of the cafe opening below them and the smell of Tom's cooking drifting up from the kitchen. Around 10, Margaret appeared with sandwiches and lemonade, took one look at the destruction, and shook her head with affection. You two are either crazy or brilliant, she announced, setting down the food on a patch of intact decking. Haven't decided which yet. Can it be both? Lena asked, accepting a sandwich gratefully. With you? Usually is. Margaret turned to Evan with the assessing look of someone who'd raised 3 kids and knew how to read people. You sure you know what you're getting into with this one? She's stubborn as a mule and twice as likely to kick you when you're trying to help. I'm standing right here, Lena protested. I know, baby. That's why I'm warning him. But Margaret's smile was warm, maternal. Seriously, though, thank you for helping. This place means a lot to a lot of people, and watching it struggle has been hard on all of us. Evan nodded, not sure what to say to that. He wasn't used to gratitude for his work beyond payment and maybe a handshake. The way Margaret looked at him, like he was doing something heroic instead of just building a deck, made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. After Margaret left, the work got harder. They were into the structural components now, the heavy beams that required careful removal to avoid destabilizing what remained. Evan worked with the focused intensity he always brought to dangerous tasks, hyper-aware of load distribution and weight transfer, making sure nothing collapsed while they were undermining it. Lena watched him work with an attention that felt different than simple observation. She was studying him, he realized, learning not just what he did, but how he did it. The way he tested every connection before trusting it. The way he moved with deliberate economy, never rushing but never wasting motion either. "You really love this," she said during a water break, both of them sitting on the lawn beneath the deck they were dismantling. "The building, the problem solving, all of it." "It's the only thing I've ever been good at." Evan stared up at the exposed joists, already seeing how they'd rebuild it stronger. "My dad wanted me to go to college, study engineering, do something with my brain instead of my hands. Couldn't understand why I'd rather frame houses than design them." "Why do you prefer it?" "Because when you design something, it's just an idea, a drawing, something theoretical. But when you build it, when you actually put the pieces together and see it stand up and hold weight, that's real. That matters." He took a long drink of water. "I like real. I like things I can touch and measure and know for certain will hold or won't. Unlike people." "Unlike people," he agreed quietly. Lena was quiet for a moment, then said, "My ex-husband used to tell me I was too concrete, too focused on the tangible. He was an artist, painted these huge abstract canvases that sold for thousands of dollars to people who wanted to seem cultured. He'd talk about art as emotion, as capturing feeling, and I'd stand there thinking about lesson plans and grading rubrics, and whether I'd bought enough groceries for the week." She laughed, but it was rueful. "We lasted 2 years before he left me for someone who understood his vision better. Someone less boring." "You're not boring. You barely know me. I know you bought a cafe to honor your grandmother's memory, even though it was financially insane. I know you'd rather risk everything trying to save this place than take the safe option and sell. I know you show up at 6 in the morning to tear apart your own business because you're not willing to let someone else do the hard work." Evan met her eyes. "Boring people don't do those things. Careful people, maybe. Stubborn people, definitely, but not boring." Lena's expression softened into something he couldn't quite read. "You're good at that, you know, seeing people clearly, making them feel seen. It's just observation, same as looking at a building." "No," she said firmly. "It's not the same at all. Buildings don't need to feel seen. People do." She stood, brushed off her jeans. "Come on. This deck won't demolish itself, and I promised Margaret I'd help with lunch prep at 11. They worked for another hour before Lena had to go inside, leaving Evan to handle the heavier structural work alone. He was grateful for the solitude, for the chance to work without conversation, to let his mind focus entirely on the physical task. This was where he was most comfortable, in the space between problem and solution, using his hands to create order from chaos. The day fell into a rhythm. Lena working in the cafe, Evan working on the deck, both of them moving around each other's responsibilities with the careful choreography of people learning to share space. She'd bring him water or coffee every few hours, update him on reservation cancellations, or the occasional customer who was understanding about the situation. He'd show her the progress, explain what he'd found, what would come next. By sunset, a third of the old deck was gone, stacked in careful piles of salvageable lumber and scrap. Evan's shoulders ached, his hands were raw despite his gloves, and he could feel exhaustion settling into his bones. But the structure was safer than it had been that morning, stable enough to survive while they waited for new materials. Lena locked up the cafe and came to stand beside him, both of them looking at the half-demolished deck in the failing light. "It's going to be beautiful when it's done," she said softly. "Better than before." "That's the plan." "Evan?" She turned to face him. "Why are you really doing this? And don't give me the line about being good at what you do. There's something else." He could deflect, could give her another practical answer about helping small businesses or using his skills productively. But she'd shared her truth with him, about her marriage, her fears, her grandmother's memory, and he owed her the same honesty. "Because I spent 3 years building a life that works for Mira but leaves me feeling like I'm just going through motions," he said finally. "Work, parenting, sleep, repeat. No room for anything that's mine, anything that challenges me beyond the technical. And then I sat at that terrible table and you offered me a better one, and for the first time in years someone looked at me like I was worth talking to instead of worth leaving." He met her eyes. "This deck, this project, it's hard and risky and probably foolish, but it feels alive in a way my life hasn't felt alive in a long time. So maybe I'm doing it as much for me as for you." Lena didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached out and squeezed his arm briefly, a gesture of understanding that didn't need words. "I'm glad you sat at the better table." "Me too." She headed to her car, and Evan loaded his tools into his truck, every muscle protesting the movement. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Danny and a text from Mira asking if he could help her with a school project tomorrow after pickup. Real life pressing in, reminding him that he had responsibilities beyond this cafe and this woman and this deck that was slowly consuming his free time. But when he got home and collapsed on the couch with a frozen dinner and Mira's school project spread across the coffee table, he felt more settled than he had in months. Tired, yes. Sore, absolutely. But purposeful in a way that went beyond duty, beyond just being enough for his daughter. He was building something. It mattered. He mattered. The days blurred together after that. Wake at 5, work on the deck until he had to get Mira to school, put in hours at his regular job sites, pick up Mira, help with homework and dinner and bedtime, then back to the cafe to work into the night while Lena cleaned up from dinner service and eventually joined him, holding lights or handing him tools or just sitting nearby doing paperwork while he built. They talked during those late hours, conversations that wandered from childhood memories to failed relationships to what they wanted from life beyond just survival. Lena told him about her grandmother's Alzheimer's, about watching someone she loved forget everything except the cafe, about promising to keep it alive and then nearly destroying it through avoidance. Evan told her about Claire's departure, about the night he'd sat in Mira's nursery holding his infant daughter and realizing he was completely alone in the responsibility of raising her. "Do you resent her?" Lena asked one night, both of them sitting on the partially rebuilt deck at midnight, surrounded by sawdust and new lumber. "Claire for leaving? I used to. Now I just feel sad about it. Sad that she couldn't find what she needed with us. Sad that Mira's growing up with a part-time mother. Sad that I failed at something I really tried to make work." Evan stared at his hands, at the calluses and scars that told the story of his work. "But mostly I feel grateful that it ended when Mira was young enough not to remember the fighting, that we were able to split relatively amicably, that Claire's parents stepped up when she stepped back." "That's very mature of you." "It's very exhausting, is what it is. I'd rather feel simple anger than this complicated acceptance." He smiled despite himself. "But simple isn't an option when you're raising a kid. Everything has to be measured, considered, explained in ways a 7-year-old can understand without losing her ability to love her mother." "You're a good father," Lena said quietly. "Mira's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her. She's the only thing I've ever built that turned out better than I planned." The new lumber arrived on Tuesday morning, 2 tons of premium cedar that Evan had convinced his supplier to extend on credit. They spent the day sorting and stacking, Lena learning the difference between structural and decorative lumber, why some pieces were better for joists and others for decking. She absorbed it all with the focused attention she probably brought to teaching, asking questions that showed she wanted to understand not just what, but why. Wednesday, they started rebuilding the support structure, Evan working with a level and plumb bob to ensure everything was perfectly square and true. Lena mixed concrete for the new footings, learning to get the consistency right, understanding why proper foundation mattered for everything that came after. Thursday, the new support beam went in, a massive engineered timber that required both of them and creative use of a come-along to maneuver into position. When it finally settled into place, perfectly level and properly supported, Lena actually cheered. "We did it," she said, grinning with an excitement that made her look years younger. "That's the part that was failing, right? The critical structural component? That's the one. Everything else builds off this." Evan checked his measurements one more time, confirmed what he already knew. It was perfect, would hold for the next 50 years without issue. "The deck's not going to collapse now. We've stabilized the critical failure point. So we're past the emergency?" "We're past the emergency? Now it's just building." Lena looked at the new beam with an expression of such profound relief that Evan realized how much fear she'd been carrying, how much weight she'd held alone before he arrived. She'd trusted him with this, had let him tear apart and rebuild something essential, and now she could see the evidence that the trust was justified. "I need to call the city inspector," she said suddenly. "Show him the work, Get the emergency closure order lifted for the indoor space at least. Even if the patio's not done, we can operate normally inside while we finish. Good idea. Want me to be here when he comes? Would you? I know you're busy, but having you explain the structural work would probably help. Martin Chen arrived Friday afternoon, did a thorough inspection of the new support system, and nodded approvingly at the quality of the work. This is solid construction, he told Lena, typing notes into his tablet. Better than what was there originally, actually. Mr. Cole knows what he's doing. He does, Lena agreed, and the pride in her voice made Evan's chest feel tight. I'm still going to need a full inspection before the patio can reopen, but the emergency closure for the building interior is lifted as of now. You can resume normal operations inside. Martin actually smiled, a rare expression on his normally neutral face. I'm glad this worked out, Ms. Whitaker. It would have been a shame to lose this place. After he left, Lena stood in the cafe staring at the lifted closure notice like it was a winning lottery ticket. Then she pulled out her phone and started calling staff members, her voice bright with relief and excitement. We're reopening the interior tomorrow, full service. Yes, I know it's short notice, but we're back. We're actually back. That evening, the cafe filled up for the first time in a week. Customers who'd heard they were open again and wanted to show support. Evan watched from the deck area, continuing his work while the dinner service unfolded below. He could hear laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses and silverware, all the sounds of a restaurant that was alive and thriving despite everything. Margaret brought him dinner around 7, Tom's special pasta dish, and a glass of wine he didn't ask for but appreciated. She sat on an overturned bucket while he ate, both of them watching Lena work the dining room through the window, greeting customers and clearly radiating relief. She's different with you around, Margaret observed. Lighter, like she remembers how to hope for things instead of just surviving them. She's just happy the cafe's not closing. It's more than that. I've worked with her for 4 years, watched her go through the divorce and the business struggles and her grandmother's death. She handles things, always has. But there's this wall she keeps up, this sense that she has to do everything alone because asking for help is failing. Margaret looked at him directly. You got through that wall somehow, made her believe that accepting help isn't the same as giving up. Evan didn't know what to say to that, so he focused on his pasta and let Margaret's words settle around him. He hadn't meant to get through any walls. He'd just offered to fix a deck and somehow ended up here, working 70-hour weeks and thinking about a woman who wasn't his to think about, who was a business owner and a friend, and nothing more because his life was too complicated for anything more. Except it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like something building, something stronger than friendship, but not yet definable. Growing board by board alongside the deck he was constructing. The weekend brought longer work hours. Evan arrived before sunrise and stayed past midnight, driven by the need to finish before he ran out of available time. Mira was with her grandparents again, giving him 2 full days to push hard on the project. Lena worked beside him whenever she could break away from the cafe, learning to install joists and deck boards, understanding how everything connected to create a structure that would hold hundreds of pounds without flexing. By Sunday evening, the deck was 3/4 complete. The new structure was beautiful, clean lines, perfect spacing, premium materials that would weather gracefully over decades. It was better than the original had ever been, built to modern code with engineering that accounted for every stress point. They stood together looking at it in the dusk, both exhausted and covered in sawdust, and Evan felt that particular satisfaction that came from building something right. Not fast, not cheap, but right. The kind of work that would last, that would hold up under pressure and time. It's almost done, Lena said softly. Another week, maybe? Maybe less. Just the decking boards to finish, then railings and final inspection. Evan checked his measurements one more time, a habit he couldn't break. You'll have your patio back by next weekend. I'll have more than what I had before. She turned to look at him, her expression serious. This is twice the deck the original was. Stronger, safer, more beautiful. You didn't just repair it, you rebuilt it better. That's the only way worth doing it. If you're going to invest the time and materials, might as well build something that lasts. Is that your philosophy on everything? Pretty much. Why build something that falls apart? Why invest in anything temporary? He meant it about structures, about houses and decks, and the physical world he knew how to navigate. But standing there with Lena in the gathering darkness, surrounded by evidence of what they'd built together, he wondered if maybe he meant it about other things too. Things he wasn't ready to name yet. Things that felt as solid as the deck beneath their feet and just as carefully constructed, one piece at a time, testing every connection before trusting it to hold weight. Lena's phone rang, Tom with a question about Monday's menu. She answered it, walked a few steps away to discuss food orders and prep schedules. Evan used the moment to check his own phone, finding messages from Danny asking how the project was going, and from Mira sending him photos of a Lego dinosaur she'd built with her grandfather. Real life. Reminding him that this, the cafe, the deck, the late nights with Lena, was temporary, a project with a defined endpoint. Soon the work would be done, and he'd go back to his regular jobs and his regular life, and Lena would run her cafe, and they'd be friendly acquaintances who'd helped each other through a crisis. That was how it should be. That was the sensible outcome. So why did the thought of it feel like loss? The final week of work passed in a blur of precision and exhaustion. Evan installed the remaining deck boards with the meticulous care he brought to every finished detail, ensuring each one was perfectly spaced, properly fastened, sanded smooth. Lena worked beside him when she could, learning the rhythm of construction: measure, cut, install, check, repeat. They didn't talk much during those hours, both focused on the work, but the silence between them had become comfortable, easy, the kind shared by people who understood each other without needing constant conversation. On Thursday afternoon, Evan was installing the last section of railing when Mira's school called. The nurse, apologetic and professional, explained that Mira had a fever of 102 and needed to be picked up immediately. Evan was an hour away, covered in sawdust, with 3 hours of work left before the railing would be secure enough to leave overnight. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he said, already mentally calculating how fast he could clean up and drive. 30 minutes, maybe 40. He ended the call to find Lena watching him, already reading the situation in his expression. "Mira's sick?" "Fever. School nurse wants her picked up now." Evan looked at the unfinished railing, at the work that couldn't safely be left half done, at the choice between his daughter and his commitment. There wasn't actually a choice. Mira always came first, would always come first, no matter what promises he'd made to anyone else. "Go," Lena said immediately. "I'll secure what you've started. Make sure nothing's dangerous. We can finish tomorrow." "You don't know how to?" "Then tell me. Quick version. What needs to happen to make this safe overnight?" Evan gave her rapid instructions: which bolts to tighten, where to place temporary barriers, how to test stability. She repeated it back perfectly, already pulling on her work gloves. He grabbed his keys, his phone, started toward his truck, then turned back. "Thank you," he said, and meant it for more than just the railing. "She's your daughter. There's nothing to thank me for." Lena was already kneeling by the unfinished section, following his instructions with the careful attention she'd brought to every task. "Drive safe. Tell Mira I hope she feels better." Evan drove 15 miles over the speed limit and still felt like he was moving too slowly. When he finally pulled up to the school, Mira was waiting in the nurse's office, looking small and miserable, her face flushed with fever and her velociraptor clutched tight. She perked up slightly when she saw him. "Dad, I don't feel good." "I know, baby. Let's get you home." He scooped her up. She was getting too big for this, too old, but right now she folded into him like she was tiny again, trusting him completely to make everything better. "We'll get some medicine in you and you can rest on the couch. Okay?" The rest of the afternoon and evening passed in the particular slow-motion urgency of caring for a sick child, checking her temperature every hour, making sure she stayed hydrated, sitting beside her while she dozed fitfully through fever dreams about dinosaurs and school projects. Evan called Danny to cancel their Friday plans, texted his regular job sites to explain he'd need to reschedule, and settled in for however long it took for Mira to recover. Around 8, his phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "Railing secured, deck is safe. How's Mira?" He typed back one-handed, his other arm around his sleeping daughter. "Fever's down to 100. She'll be okay. Thanks for handling the railing." "Of course, take whatever time you need. The deck can wait." But it couldn't wait, not really. They were supposed to have the final inspection on Monday, supposed to reopen the patio for the weekend rush. Every day of delay was revenue Lena couldn't afford to lose, customers who might go elsewhere and not come back. Evan knew this math, had factored it into his timeline, and now his daughter's illness was throwing everything off schedule. "I can probably come in tomorrow afternoon," he texted, "if her fever stays down and my mom can watch her." "Evan, your daughter is sick. The deck is not more important than that. The deck is your livelihood. And Mira is yours. We'll figure it out. Rest tonight, take care of her tomorrow, and we'll see where things stand." A pause, then another message. "You've already done more than I had any right to ask. If we have to delay the inspection, we delay it. The cafe survived this long. It'll survive a few more days." Evan read the messages twice, feeling something shift in his chest. Claire used to resent when Mira got sick, not because she didn't love their daughter, but because it disrupted plans, required flexibility, meant putting something else on hold. She'd been supportive in her way, but there had always been an undercurrent of frustration, a feeling like his parenting responsibilities were inconvenient obstacles to their life together. Lena was offering understanding without resentment, giving him space to be a father first without making him feel guilty about it. It was such a small thing, such a reasonable response. But after years of apologizing for prioritizing Mira, it felt revolutionary. By Friday morning, Mira's fever had broken, and she was demanding pancakes, which Evan took as a good sign. He called his mother, who arrived within the hour armed with children's movies and the particular brand of grandmother comfort that included unlimited screen time and negotiable vegetable consumption. "Go," his mother said, shooing him toward the door. "We'll be fine. She's already asking about that documentary about marine dinosaurs. Did you know those existed?" "Mosasaurs. She's been obsessed for weeks." Evan kissed Mira's forehead, reminded her to listen to Grandma, and headed to the cafe feeling guilty about leaving her but grateful for family who showed up without judgment. Lena was on the deck when he arrived, surrounded by building inspection paperwork, and looking stressed in a way he hadn't seen since the closure order. She glanced up as he approached, relief flickering across her face. "How's Mira?" "Better. Fever's gone. She's eating again. My mom's with her." Evan surveyed the deck, noting that Lena had not only secured the railing, but had actually made progress on the installation, following his instructions with impressive accuracy. "You finished more than I expected. I watched what you did, tried to replicate it. Not sure if it's right, though. Some of these connections feel loose." Evan checked her work, found it mostly solid with a few bolts that needed additional tightening. "This is good. Better than good, actually. You're learning fast." "I had an excellent teacher who's very patient about explaining why things matter, not just how to do them." Lena stood, brushing sawdust from her jeans. "But I'm glad you're here." The city inspector called. "He can move our Monday appointment to today if we're ready. Said he had a cancellation and we'd be doing him a favor filling the slot." "Are we ready?" "I think so. The deck is structurally complete, railings almost done. What am I missing?" Evan walked the perimeter slowly, checking every connection, every board, every detail that Martin Chen would examine. The work was solid, better than code required, built to last decades. But there were still finishing touches, a few railings to complete, some sanding on rough edges, final cleaning of sawdust and construction debris. "Give me 3 hours," he said. "I can have it inspection ready by 1 if we both work." They pushed hard through the late morning and early afternoon, Evan finishing the railings while Lena sanded and cleaned, both of them moving with the focused urgency of people racing a deadline. By 12:45, the deck was complete, every board secure, every railing smooth, every surface cleaned and ready for examination. Martin Chen arrived promptly at 1, did his thorough inspection with the same careful neutrality he'd shown before. He tested the railings, checked the spacing between deck boards, examined the support structure underneath, measured clearances, and reviewed the permit paperwork. Evan and Lena stood together watching, both tense, both trying not to show it. Finally, Martin straightened up, made some final notes on his tablet, and turned to face them with an expression that might have been approval. "This is excellent work," he said. "Structurally sound, exceeds current code requirements, properly documented and permitted. I'm signing off on the completion and lifting the patio closure order effective immediately." He looked at Evan with something like respect. "You do quality work, Mr. Cole. If you ever need a reference for future projects, feel free to use my name." Thank you, Evan said, feeling the tension in his shoulders finally release. After Martin left, Lena stood on the completed deck looking out at the view, the walking trail below, the trees in full summer green, the river visible in the distance. The afternoon sun caught the fresh cedar, making it glow warm and golden. Everything was perfect, polished, ready for the customers who would fill these tables tomorrow and every day after. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it." "You did it. I just provided the labor and expertise." "No." Lena turned to face him, her expression fierce. "We did this together. You designed it, yes, and you did most of the physical work. But I was here too, learning, helping, refusing to let my cafe die without a fight. This deck exists because we both committed to building it, because we both showed up every day and did the work even when it was hard and scary and impossible." She gestured at the structure around them. "This is ours. Both of us." Evan felt something catch in his throat at the possessive. Ours. Both of us. The acknowledgement that what they'd built extended beyond wood and nails into something harder to measure but equally solid. He'd spent 3 years building a life alone, carrying weight alone, believing that self-sufficiency was the same as strength. But standing here on a deck that literally couldn't have existed without both of them, he recognized the lie in that. Some things were built alone, but the best things, the things that lasted, required partnership. "I should probably send you a final invoice," he said, deflecting from feelings he wasn't ready to name. "Though I'm not sure how to calculate labor costs when half the time we were just talking about life while we worked. The contract your accountant drew up is pretty specific about payment terms. 24 monthly installments, interest-free, starting next month." Lena pulled out her phone, showed him the bank transfer notification. "But I already paid you for materials and the first 3 months of labor. Figured I owed you that much up front for taking such a risk on me." Evan stared at the amount, more than he'd expected, more than was probably wise for her to pay all at once given her financial situation. "Lena, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. You trusted me enough to extend credit when I had no guarantee of paying you back. The least I can do is pay what I can, when I can, to show that trust was justified." She put her phone away, met his eyes. "Besides, the cafe had the best week of revenue since I bought it. Indoor seating was completely full every night. People were understanding about the patio being closed, and we got a great review from that food blogger who came in Tuesday. I can afford this payment, and it feels good to start making things right." They stood there in the afternoon light, the completed deck solid beneath their feet, the cafe humming with life behind them. Evan knew he should leave, should go home to check on Mira, should put distance between himself and this woman who'd somehow become essential to his daily routine over the past 3 weeks. But leaving felt wrong, felt like abandoning something unfinished, even though the deck was complete. "Come to dinner," Lena said suddenly. "Tomorrow night. Bring Mira. I'd love to meet her. We'll sit on the newly reopened patio, eat Tom's cooking, celebrate actually surviving this disaster." She paused, then added more quietly, "Please. I want to thank you properly, and I want to do it somewhere that isn't a construction site." "Lena, you don't need to thank me with dinner. You're already paying me more than fairly. This isn't about payment. This is about wanting to spend time with you when we're not covered in sawdust and racing deadlines. This is about—" She searched for words. "This is about me hoping that when the project is finished, we don't have to be finished too." There it was. The thing they'd been carefully not saying for 3 weeks. The awareness that had been building board by board alongside the deck. Evan could pretend not to understand, could deflect it into friendship or professional courtesy. Or he could be honest about what he felt, what he wanted, what terrified him about wanting it. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "At relationships, at opening up, at being what people need emotionally instead of just practically. Claire left because I couldn't give her that, and I don't know if I've changed enough to be different with someone else." "I'm not asking you to be different. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, the person who notices structural problems from across a patio and offers to fix them, the person who shows up at 6 in the morning and works until midnight because he made a commitment, the person who drops everything when his daughter needs him and doesn't apologize for putting her first." Lena stepped closer, her voice going soft. "I'm asking for the person I've been working beside for 3 weeks, who makes me laugh, and challenges me and treats me like I'm capable instead of fragile. That's who I want to have dinner with. That's who I'm hoping wants to have dinner with me. Evan thought about all the reasons this was complicated. His life built around Mira's needs, Lena's cafe requiring constant attention, the fact that they'd met during a crisis, and maybe what they felt was just proximity and shared purpose. He thought about how dating had felt impossible before he met her, how the bad date at the worst table had seemed like evidence that he was meant to stay alone. Then he thought about the better table she'd offered, about 3 weeks of building something solid together, about the way she'd secured the railing so he could take care of his daughter without guilt. He thought about trust earned board by board, connection built through showing up and doing the work even when it was hard. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow night, 6:30? Perfect. And Evan, bring Mira's Velociraptor. Tom's been experimenting with a new dessert presentation, and I bet she'd have opinions about the chocolate decorations." That surprised a laugh from him. "How do you know about the Velociraptor?" "You mentioned it. About 40 times over 3 weeks." Lena smiled, warm and genuine. "You're a good father. It shows in everything you say, everything you prioritize. I like that about you." She headed back inside to start preparing for the dinner service, leaving Evan alone on the completed deck. He ran his hand along the railing he'd built, feeling the smooth wood, the solid construction, the permanence of something made to last. The deck would be here in 10 years, 20, 50 if properly maintained. People would gather here, celebrate here, make memories here, all of them unaware of the crisis that had almost destroyed it or the partnership that had saved it. That was good work. Work that mattered. Work that would outlast both of them. He drove home thinking about tomorrow's dinner, about introducing Mira to Lena, about what it meant to build something with intention instead of just letting life happen to him. His daughter was asleep on the couch when he arrived, his mother reading beside her with the particular contentment of grandmothers who got to love children without the exhausting responsibility of raising them. "How'd it go?" his mother asked softly. "Deck passed inspection. Project's complete." Evan sat down carefully beside Mira, brushed her hair back from her forehead. Still cool, fever definitely gone. "Thanks for staying with her." "That's what family does." His mother studied him with the assessing look of someone who'd known him his entire life. "You seem different, lighter, maybe. This project was good for you." "It was just building a deck." "If you say so." But her smile suggested she saw through that deflection completely. "You've got dinner tomorrow night, don't you? With the cafe owner?" Did Danny tell you?" "Danny mentioned you'd been spending a lot of time there. And you've got that look. The one you used to get when you were young and trying to pretend you didn't care about something you absolutely cared about." She patted his hand. "I'm glad. You deserve good things, Evan. You deserve to be happy, not just functional." After his mother left, Evan sat with Mira while she slept, thinking about happiness versus functionality, about building a life versus just surviving one. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that being a good father was enough, that Mira's well-being justified his own emotional hibernation. But watching her sleep now, her velociraptor tucked under her chin and a slight smile on her face despite having been sick, he wondered if maybe she needed to see him happy more than she needed him to be perfectly self-sacrificing. Maybe the best gift he could give her wasn't just stability and presence, but the example of someone who built a life worth living instead of just enduring. Saturday morning arrived clear and warm, perfect weather for a cafe's patio reopening. Evan spent the morning with Mira, making the promised dinosaur pancakes and helping her finish the marine biology poster she'd been working on all week. She was chatty and energetic, completely recovered, full of questions about where he'd been spending so much time lately. "I've been helping fix a cafe that had some structural problems," he explained, showing her photos of the deck on his phone. "See? The old support beams were rotting, so we had to replace them and rebuild the whole patio." "That's a lot of wood," Mira observed, scrolling through the images with interest. "Did you measure everything? You always say measure twice, cut once." "I did, and the owner helped. She learned a lot about construction over the past few weeks." "Is she nice?" "Very nice. Actually, she invited us to have dinner at her cafe tonight. Would you like that?" Mira's eyes lit up with the particular excitement of children presented with a new experience. "Can I bring Blue?" Blue was the velociraptor, named after the dinosaur from her favorite movie. "And can I wear my dress with the dinosaurs on it?" "Yes to both. We'll leave at 6. The afternoon passed in the pleasant routine of weekend parenting. A trip to the park, ice cream from their favorite shop, Mira's careful selection of which stuffed animals needed to come to dinner and which could stay home. By 6, they were both dressed and ready. Mira in her dinosaur dress, and Evan in jeans and a button-down that Danny had given him last Christmas, claiming he needed to own at least one shirt without a logo on it. The cafe parking lot was full when they arrived, every table visible through the windows occupied by people enjoying their Saturday evening. Evan felt a flash of pride seeing it. The cafe that had nearly closed now thriving, full of life and laughter, and the kind of community space Lena had fought so hard to preserve. Mira held his hand as they walked inside, suddenly shy in the way she got around new people. Margaret was at the host stand and lit up when she saw them. "You must be Mira! I've heard so much about you, and you brought a dinosaur friend." "This is Blue. She's a velociraptor." Mira held up the stuffed animal for inspection. "Did you know velociraptors were actually really smart and probably had feathers?" "I did not know that. Maybe you can tell me more about it while we get you seated." Margaret winked at Evan. "Lena's waiting for you on the patio. Said to put you at the best table." She led them outside to the newly reopened deck, and Evan felt his breath catch slightly at the sight. Every table was full, string lights overhead creating a warm glow as evening settled in. The sound of conversation and laughter mixing with jazz music playing softly from speakers he'd helped Lena install. It was beautiful, vibrant, exactly what it was supposed to be. And at a table in the corner, not the worst table, but not the most prominent either, just right for conversation and watching the sunset, Lena stood waiting. She wore a simple blue dress, and her hair was down for the first time since he'd met her, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw them, warm and genuine and slightly nervous. "Evan? And you must be Mira." Lena knelt down to Mira's level, giving her the respect of eye contact. "I'm Lena. Your dad has told me all about you. He says you're an expert on dinosaurs." "I know a lot about them," Mira said, warming slightly. "Do you like dinosaurs?" "I think they're fascinating, especially velociraptors. I heard they were very intelligent." "They were, and they hunted in packs and had this special claw they used to—" Mira launched into her favorite facts, and Lena listened with the same focused attention she brought to everything, asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested rather than just being polite. Evan watched them talk, something in his chest loosening at the sight of his daughter comfortable with this woman, this person who'd become important to him over 3 weeks of building together. Mira was his priority, always, and seeing her happy with Lena felt like confirmation that maybe this could work. Maybe he could want something for himself without it taking away from what she needed. They sat down at the table, and Tom appeared with a special menu he'd designed just for tonight, Mira's portions of everything with modifications for kid preferences. She ordered the pasta with butter and parmesan, carefully considered the vegetable options, and asked very seriously if the bread could come with extra butter. "She's like you," Lena observed once Mira was occupied with the coloring page Margaret had provided. "Very specific about what she wants, very clear in expressing it. Claire used to say she got my stubbornness and her intelligence, which she claimed was the worst possible combination." Evan smiled despite the memory. "She's not wrong. Mira knows what she thinks, and she's not easily persuaded otherwise." "Sounds like someone else I know." The food arrived, perfectly prepared, beautifully presented, the kind of quality that explained why people drove an hour for patio reservations. Mira declared the pasta the best she'd ever had, and requested the recipe so they could make it at home. Lena promised to ask Tom, then spent the next 20 minutes teaching Mira how to fold her napkin into different shapes. Evan sat back watching them, feeling the strangeness of this moment. His daughter, his work, this woman who'd entered his life through a terrible date and a collapsing deck. 3 weeks ago, he'd been sitting at the worst table planning his exit from an evening he couldn't wait to end. Now he was at the best table watching his daughter laugh with someone who saw him clearly and liked him anyway, eating food that existed because a cafe had survived because he'd chosen to help. "Dad," Mira said, suddenly interrupting his thoughts, "Lena says you built this whole deck in 3 weeks. Is that true?" "We built it," he corrected. "Lena helped with a lot of the work. It was a team effort." "But you designed it? You made sure it wouldn't fall down?" "That's my job, yeah. Making sure structures are safe and solid. Mira considered this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. Like how you fixed my bookshelf when it was wobbly. You said it needed better support or my books would fall. Exactly like that. Same principle, just bigger. Cool. She went back to her pasta, apparently satisfied, and Lena met Evan's eyes across the table with a smile that suggested she understood the significance of that approval. The evening unfolded with the easy rhythm of good company, conversation flowing between bites. Mira's enthusiasm for dinosaurs somehow leading to a discussion of Tom's cooking techniques, which led to Lena's stories about learning to run a restaurant when she'd never worked in food service. The patio filled with the sounds of other diners, other conversations, other people enjoying the space that had almost been lost. Around 8, Tom emerged from the kitchen carrying a dessert plate decorated to look like a dinosaur landscape. Chocolate mousse formed into hills, cookie pieces arranged like trees, and in the center, a small chocolate velociraptor that made Mira gasp with delight. "This is for you," Tom said, setting it down with a flourish. "Lena mentioned you were a dinosaur expert, so I thought you might appreciate some edible paleontology." "This is the best thing ever." Mira looked at Evan with wide eyes. "Can we take a picture before I eat it?" They took several pictures, Mira carefully positioning Blue beside the chocolate dinosaur, explaining to Tom exactly which species he'd created and whether it was anatomically accurate. Tom engaged seriously with her critique, promised to research better reference images for next time, and left them to enjoy the dessert with a warmth that suggested he approved of Lena's dinner companions. As the sun set fully and the string lights took over illumination duties, Mira started to fade, her energy depleted by a week of illness and an evening of social interaction. She curled up against Evan's side, Blue tucked under her arm, and watched the other diners with sleepy contentment. "I like her," Mira announced to Lena. "You're nice, and your cafe is pretty. And that deck my dad built is really good. I tested the railing and it doesn't wobble at all." "Your dad is very good at building things that don't wobble," Lena agreed seriously. "He's also very good at showing up when people need help, and at being patient while teaching someone new skills, and at making sure his daughter knows she's the most important person in his life." Mira smiled, pleased with this assessment. "He's the best dad." "I believe you." They left around 8:30, Mira half asleep and Evan carrying her to the truck while Lena walked beside them. In the parking lot, away from the crowd and the noise, they stood together in the summer darkness. "Thank you for tonight," Evan said quietly. "For dinner, for being so good with Mira, for all of it. Thank you for coming, for bringing her, for trusting me with something so important to you." Lena glanced at Mira dozing in Evan's arms. "She's wonderful. You should be proud. Every day." He shifted Mira's weight slightly, felt her burrow deeper into his shoulder. "I should get her home and into bed." "Of course." Lena hesitated, then asked, "Would you want to do this again sometime? Not as thank you dinner, but as just dinner? Getting to know each other outside of construction projects?" Evan thought about all the reasons he should say no, should keep this professional or friendly, but safely distant. Then he thought about the deck they'd built together, about trust earned and connection formed through showing up consistently, about Mira's approval and his own tentative hope that maybe he could have this, could want this, could build something lasting that wasn't just about duty. "I'd like that," he said. "Maybe next weekend? I have Mira, but we could do something all together, park, lunch, something low pressure." "That sounds perfect." Lena smiled, reached out to gently touch Mira's hair in a gesture so tender it made Evan's throat tight. "Drive safe. Text me when you get home so I know you made it okay." "I will." He buckled Mira into her booster seat, drove home through streets quiet with Saturday evening calm. In the rearview mirror, he could see the cafe glowing in the distance, the patio full of life, the structure he'd built holding up exactly as designed. Good work, work that mattered. Work that created space for community and connection and the kind of memories people carried with them. The best work wasn't just about the building, he realized. It was about what the building made possible. The relationships formed, the moments shared, the life that happened in spaces designed to hold it. Mira stirred as he carried her inside, mumbled something about chocolate dinosaurs and pretty decks. Evan got her into pajamas and brushed teeth and tucked her in with Blue positioned exactly right. She was asleep again before he left the room, peaceful and happy and safe in a home he'd fought to keep for her. His phone buzzed, a text from Lena. The patio is completely full. Standing room only. We had to turn away walk-ins. This is the best night we've had since I opened the cafe. Thank you for giving this back to me. Evan looked around his quiet house, at the life he'd built alone, at the daughter sleeping safely down the hall. He thought about 3 years of functionality over happiness, of surviving instead of living, of building walls around himself that he'd convinced himself were protection, but were really just isolation. Then he texted back, "Thank you for offering me a better table, for seeing something worth saving when I didn't see it in myself, for showing me that some things are worth the risk of building together." Her response came quickly. Some structures need 2 people to build them properly. Even the stubborn contractor has to learn that eventually. Eventually, I'm a slow learner, but I get there. I've noticed. Good thing I'm patient. Evan sat on his couch in the dark house, phone in hand, feeling something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Anticipation. Not anxiety about what could go wrong, not resignation about inevitable failure, but genuine anticipation for what might be built if he was brave enough to try. The deck project was complete. The cafe was saved. The crisis that had brought them together was resolved. Every board secure and every connection tested and proven solid. But maybe that wasn't an ending. Maybe it was a foundation, the structural support for something new that could be built on top of it, something that required trust and patience and the willingness to measure twice, commit once, and then show up every day to do the work even when it was hard. 3 weeks ago, Evan had been sitting at the worst table in the cafe, watching a bad date check her phone and planning his escape. A stranger had offered him a better table, and he'd taken it, and that single choice had rebuilt more than just a deck. It had rebuilt possibility. The next Saturday, Evan and Mira met Lena at Fletcher Park, the one with the good swings and the walking trail that circled the pond. Mira ran ahead to the playground while Evan and Lena walked slowly behind, close enough that their hands occasionally brushed but not yet holding, both of them learning the rhythm of this new thing they were building. "She's happy today," Lena observed, watching Mira climb the jungle gym with fearless enthusiasm. "She's always happy when she gets to run around outside." Evan smiled as Mira waved from the top of the structure. "Also, I may have promised ice cream later, which never hurts. Smart parenting. Survival parenting. You do what works." He glanced at Lena, at the woman who'd trusted him with her cafe and her fears and her hope that saving it was possible. "The payment came through this week, for the deck." "I know, I sent it." She said it simply, matter of fact. 23 more months of payments and we're square. Though I'm hoping we still know each other after the debt is cleared. "I think we might." Evan let his hand brush hers again, this time intentionally. "I'm not good at this. At dating, at relationships, at anything that isn't straightforward construction. But I'm willing to try if you're willing to be patient with how slowly I figure things out. I'm very patient. I waited 4 years to fix a deck that was actively rotting beneath me." Lena took his hand properly this time, fingers interlacing with his. "I think I can handle a relationship that builds slowly and carefully, one decision at a time, with someone who measures twice before committing." They walked together around the pond while Mira played, talking about small things and big things, about the cafe's reopening success and Evan's upcoming projects, and what they might do next weekend if this went well. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of conversation that didn't need forcing or performing, just 2 people learning each other's shapes and finding they fit together better than either expected. On the playground, Mira made friends with 2 other kids and they created an elaborate game involving dinosaurs, space travel, and apparently the monkey bars as a time machine. Evan watched her negotiate the rules with the same fierce certainty she brought to everything, marveling at how completely she was her own person, how little she needed him to manage her social world. "She's going to be fine," Lena said quietly, reading his thoughts. "You've built a good foundation for her. The rest is just maintenance and occasional repairs when something unexpected breaks." "That's what I'm afraid of. The unexpected breaks. The things I can't predict or prevent. Those happen to everyone. Buildings settle, weather happens, time does its work. You can't stop it, just respond well when it shows up." She squeezed his hand. Same with kids, I imagine, and relationships, and pretty much everything else worth building. Evan thought about that, about responding well versus trying to prevent every possible failure, about accepting that some breaking was inevitable, and the skill was in the repair rather than the avoidance. He'd spent 3 years trying to make Mira's life perfectly stable, perfectly safe, perfectly structured. But maybe what she actually needed was to see him handle instability with grace, repair breaks with skill, build new structures when old ones failed. Maybe she needed to see him try at something hard and uncertain, something that might not work but was worth attempting anyway. "My brother thinks I'm being impulsive," he said, "taking on too much too fast with someone I barely know." "Are you? Being impulsive?" "No. I've thought about this more carefully than I've thought about anything except Mira. I've measured twice, checked my work, tested every connection." He looked at Lena, at this woman who'd offered him a better table and then helped him build something solid. "I'm not impulsive. I'm just finally ready to commit to something I've been planning for 3 weeks." "Good." Lena smiled, warm and genuine and slightly relieved. "Because I've been planning too, in my own way. Thinking about whether this could work, whether we could work, whether taking a risk on someone I met during a crisis is wisdom or desperation." She paused. "I decided it's neither. It's just recognizing good materials when I see them and being willing to build something new even if I don't know exactly how it'll turn out." They stood together watching Mira play, hands joined, the future uncertain, but the foundation solid. Around them, families enjoyed the park, kids ran and shouted, couples walked the trail, all of them building their lives one ordinary moment at a time. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make a good story, just the quiet accumulation of time spent together, trust earned, connection deepened through consistency and care. Mira ran over eventually, breathless and demanding the promised ice cream. They walked to the shop on the corner, Mira between them holding both their hands, chattering about her new friends and the game they'd invented, and could they please come back next week because one of the kids had a book about pterodactyls she wanted to see. "Next week works," Evan said, glancing at Lena for confirmation. "Next week is perfect," she agreed. They got ice cream, chocolate for Mira, vanilla for Lena, coffee for Evan, and sat on a bench watching people pass while Mira explained in elaborate detail why pterodactyls weren't actually dinosaurs, even though everyone thought they were. Lena asked clarifying questions, genuinely interested, and Evan felt something settle deep in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of worry or challenge or uncertainty, but the presence of something worth protecting, worth building, worth showing up for every day even when it was hard. He'd been sitting at the worst table planning his escape from a life that felt too small and too lonely. A woman he didn't know had offered him a better seat, and he'd taken it, and that choice had led him here. To a park bench with ice cream and his daughter, and someone who saw him clearly and wanted him anyway. The deck was finished. The cafe was thriving. The crisis was resolved. But the building wasn't done. Relationships required maintenance, attention, the ongoing work of showing up and doing what was needed and trusting that the structure would hold under pressure. Evan was good at building things that didn't fall down. He'd spent 3 years proving it with his daughter, with his work, with the life he'd constructed alone. Now he had a chance to prove it with someone beside him, someone who understood that the best structures were built carefully, tested thoroughly, and designed to last not just through good weather, but through storms. He took Lena's hand again, sticky with ice cream and warm in the summer afternoon. Mira leaned against his other side, content and happy and safe in a world where her father was choosing to try at something uncertain, showing her by example that building a life worth living sometimes meant taking risks on people and possibilities. "Thank you," he said quietly to Lena, "for the better table, for all of it." "Thank you for sitting down," she replied, "for staying, for building something beautiful when everything seemed broken." Mira looked up at them both, smiled with chocolate ice cream on her face. "I like this," she announced. "I like when we're all together. Can we do this every week?" Evan met Lena's eyes over his daughter's head, saw his own hope reflected there. "Yeah," he said. "I think we can do that." And they did. Every week, then every few days, then so often that it stopped being remarkable and started being routine. They built slowly and carefully, one decision at a time, measuring twice and committing only when they were certain. There were hard days and misunderstandings and the inevitable stress of two independent lives trying to merge. But they showed up for each other, repaired what broke, strengthened what held. 6 months later, Evan proposed on the cafe patio at the table where Lena had first offered him a better seat. Mira helped him plan it, insisted on being there with Blue the velociraptor, and cried happy tears when Lena said yes. They married the following spring in the cafe garden, surrounded by family and friends and customers who'd become both. Margaret officiated, Tom catered, and Mira served as best person with her velociraptor pinned to her dress like a boutonniere. The patio held perfectly through the ceremony, through the reception, through hundreds of guests celebrating two people who'd found each other at the worst table and chosen to build something better. Evan Cole, who measured life in inches and load limits, who'd spent years believing he was meant to build alone, stood with his wife and his daughter and felt the weight of what they'd created together. Not just a marriage, not just a family, a life designed to last, built with care, strong enough to hold whatever came next. The foundation was solid. The structure was sound. The work was good. And standing there in the warm spring evening, surrounded by people who mattered, and the cafe that had brought them together, Evan finally understood what his father had meant years ago about building with your brain versus your hands. The best building used both the careful planning and the physical work, the measurement and the trust, the structural integrity and the willingness to let other people help hold the weight. He looked at Lena, at Mira, at the life they were building together one day at a time. It was the best work he'd ever done, and it was just beginning.